So good morning, everyone. My name is Guy Jones, and I'm the Commercial Operations Director at DAX. Obviously, it's a bit strange to be doing a conference presentation in this format, but bear with me and let's see how it goes. I'm going to talk to you today for about 15 minutes about the future of measurement in digital audio, and I will pause while the ripple of excitement fades across the country. So let's dive into it. I presented at Future of Audio last year, and I talked then about the fact that over half of the population of the UK listen to some form of digital audio every week, whether that's podcasts or music streaming or radio streaming. But what's been really interesting to see over the last month or so is the way people have turned to audio content during these difficult times. So we've seen that listening across the DATS network has increased by almost a third since the start of the crisis, which shows the important role that audio plays in people's lives. And that might be about getting information and explanation from a trusted source. It might be about the reassurance of a familiar voice, or it might just be about getting escape through, escapism through your favorite music. But I think the upswing in listening shows how engaged people are by audio and how they turn to it at a time like this. So I think it really is all about engagement and trust. And last year we surveyed over 200 of our advertisers across agencies and brands, and they agreed with that. They said that they believed that listeners were highly engaged with digital audio content. And because of that, they agreed that it was a great way to build brand trust. And at that point, they also said that it was a great way of reaching consumers on the go. And clearly, people are a little bit less on the go now than they once were. So I think what we're seeing right now is it's also a great way of reaching people in the home. And so the role of DAX, put very, very simply, is to connect advertisers to those highly engaged audiences in one simple buy. And we do that by working with some of the best audio brands on the planet. And we marry that with some really great targeting capability that allows people to find the right people at the right time, and some powerful tools that help advertisers measure the effectiveness of their campaigns. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about why we think measurement's so important, and give some examples of how it works in practice. And I'm going to spend most of the time talking about how it's evolving and getting better right now. And it's an important subject because in that survey that I mentioned earlier, 2/3 of buyers told us that they thought that audio had innovative ways to measure campaigns, and that's really encouraging. It means that the industry as a whole is doing a decent job in helping advertisers understand campaign performance and ROI. But 2/3 is a good stat, it's not a great stat, and it means that there's still a way to go. And we talk a lot about all the exciting things happening in audio. We talk about creative opportunities and podcasts and things like in-car devices. But we also need to spend some time thinking about whether or not audio actually delivers the outcomes that brands want to see. And spoiler alert, you won't be surprised to hear that I say that it does. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's relatively complex. Listening behavior is relatively complex. This is actually Midas data that shows how people listen throughout the course of a day. And if you dig into this graph, you can see the peaks that different devices have at different types of days. So it might be, for example, that I'm listening to a news update from Sky on my Alexa while I'm having my cereal in the morning. It might be in ordinary times that I'm listening to a podcast like James O'Brien through my headphones while I'm on my way into work. And then in the 5 minutes I have between video calls at the moment, I might just want some pure escapism and to play Heart 80s through my desktop before, at the end of the day, going back onto my phone, plugging in the headphones and having a SoundCloud playlist for a workout. The important thing, though, is it's different types of content, lots of different types of content with lots of different purposes at different moments through the day. And even at the moment, when I'm living my life in a really small radius around my house, I'm still using different devices as I move from room to room. So in the ordinary course of living, that's an even greater feature. And the other thing that's important is that 8 out of 10 people are listening to audio while they're doing something else. And I don't know about you, but if I'm mowing the lawn, or if I'm having dinner with my family, or I'm outside on my government-approved walk for 45 minutes a day, I don't tend to stop what I'm doing immediately, take out my phone, and take out an insurance policy, regardless of how great the ad might be. So last click attribution, pure CPA, isn't always the best way of measuring. It's not the most relevant metric for an upper or mid-funnel medium in the way that audio is. At DAX, our solution to this for the last few years has been a product called Listener Insight ID, which allows us to measure the behavior of listeners online after they've been exposed to an audio ad and compare that to people who weren't exposed to that ad. And there's some pretty clever tech that goes behind it, but what's much more important than the how is the why. And for us, the important thing is that advertisers should expect relevant and actionable insight. For example, what kind of creative executions have the most cut through? What kind of audience segments deliver the greatest results? When a user goes onto a client's website having heard a campaign, what do they do there, and how does that compare to people who weren't listeners to that campaign? And lastly, audiences. So what more richness of understanding, what more insight can we tell an advertiser about the people who have been engaging with their products and listening to their ads? And I'll give you an example. So last year, Currys ran a DAX campaign, and they used this to target a tech-curious audience in a couple of different ways. They used their own data, and they also used second-party data that we made available from dentists' sites. And the intention of the campaign was to drive people to the Windows section of their website. And I'm using this in a conference presentation, so clearly the results are going to be quite good. But what we saw was genuinely really interesting. We saw almost 2% of exposed listeners went on to visit the Currys website. But what was really interesting is that they had 5 times the engagement of people who hadn't listened to that ad. So it's telling the advertiser something really important about the effectiveness of their campaign, but it's also giving them actionable insight into the effectiveness of that creative message. It's triggering something in people's behaviors. And obviously right now, at a time where all retail really is online retail, or certainly a vast majority of it, the ability to draw these connections, the ability to report on effectiveness in this way becomes even more important than usual. And that's just one example, but the point is pretty clear. Audio does deliver real world outcomes for businesses, but not only that, the technology is in place to ensure that it can prove it. But the complexity I talked about earlier hasn't gone away. We've still got listeners engaging with different types of content on different devices at different moments throughout the day. And in pure measurement terms, that causes a bit of a problem. To put it really simply, if I'm listening to an ad for eBay on my morning walk, and at lunchtime I go onto the eBay website to buy a product, I'm doing that on 2 different devices. So historically, that attribution, that connection has been lost. And so the next phase of measurement in digital audio, the future of measurement in digital audio, is to solve that. We're doing that at DAX at the moment with our cross-device product, which we launched at the beginning of this year. And this isn't a sales presentation, so I'm not going to talk about all the different features that it has. What I'm going to talk about is what I think is really exciting, which is that it even further enriches the actionable insight that I mentioned earlier. It goes even further towards proving audio's ability to deliver real-world results. So the product works by tying together data from various device IDs, various IDs that we see across the DAX network, different pieces of device information, and patterns of listening, including content, time of day, and much more. And we tie all of this together so that we can produce both a deterministic and a probabilistic view of behavior at an individual rather than a device level. Now, let me sort of make that a little bit more real for you and give you a specific example. So we worked with a digital banking app who are aiming at B2B audiences for business accounts and business loans. And the target audience was pretty interesting. It was a real mix. On the one hand, they were targeting people who were based in offices in industries like IT, finance, and legal. And on the other hand, they were targeting people who were in more kind of outdoor industries, things like construction, hospitality, agriculture, which meant that the delivery was quite fragmented. The way that someone listens, the devices someone listens through if they're sitting at their laptop at work, are likely to be quite different to the way that someone listens if they're working on a building site or in the kitchen of a hotel restaurant. But using cross-device, we're able to gain a fuller understanding of how the campaign performed across multiple touchpoints. So if we were looking at it through a single device view, this is what we saw. We saw a majority of delivery on mobile phones, some delivery on desktops, and a very small amount on tablets. And the campaigns are largely split between mobile and browser. A subset of people then go on to browse, to go to the advertiser's website. And this, again, is all on a single device view. But they go to the advertiser's website to read more, to research, and to browse. And then another subset of people will go on to act. which in this case was about going to the product sign-up pages for those financial products that I mentioned earlier. And this is a really, really valuable view. Listener Insight ID is an incredibly powerful tool. For example, through this view, the advertiser can start to understand things I mentioned earlier about what's the most effective time of day or creative message or audience segment. But it's not the whole story, particularly with this client who, as a B2B, targeting a B2B audience, are likely to have customers who are using both work and personal devices. So with cross-device, the journey looks a lot more complex, but we're able to simplify it and draw out trends, to draw out the actionable insight that I was talking about earlier. Here we can see that the ad was played out in the way that we saw before, but then there's a split in how it's researched. Some people staying on one device, some people going from phone to a different phone, some people going from phone to desktop, and some people moving between different browsers within their desktop devices. And after that, we can see that the insight becomes even richer. Certain people at this point, having done some initial research and browsing, are in the space where they want to go to that product sign-up page. For other people, it takes longer. They use more devices to complete their research journey before they're ready to act. So that, I mean, in one way that looks like a really cool water slide, and it was pointed out to me, but in another way, it's an interesting view of how people move through different devices in a journey. But as I said, this needs to be about actionable insight. So what kind of things can we learn? What kind of things can we tell this advertiser that will help them make this campaign work harder, that will help them, will give them insight to make their future campaigns better? Well, first of all, in that single device view, it looked like mobile was the least effective part of the campaign. It was the one that delivered the least in terms of people going to product sign-up pages. But actually through this view, you can not only see that that was massively undercounted, but also that a lot of the desktop browsing research activity, a lot of the people going to product sign-up pages on desktop actually first heard that ad and were triggered and moved to do that by listening on mobile. So it gives a different picture of what's effective within the campaign. Secondly, the pattern we saw showed people going from a primary device, probably a work device, through to a home device. And not only that, but when they went to that home device, they didn't just stick listening to the business-to-business products that were talked about in the ads. They started to research things like personal loans or personal bank accounts as well, which gives the advertiser an insight into cross-promotion activities that they might want to consider in future. And lastly, when it comes just down to the nuts and bolts, we can learn things about optimal delivery. So for example, in this case, on a single device view, it looked like 8 was the number of times that you should be aiming for someone to hear this before they'll do the action that you want them to take. But actually, once you start to break it down and look at it in a cross-device view, that becomes 6. And more importantly, we can even give insight into which order is most effective, how ads should be sequenced across different devices in order to deliver the most value. But it's not just about delivery either. This cross-device view gives people real insight into what's kind of underlying, some of the underlying behaviors and attitudes and situations of the people who are engaging with their products and listening to their ads. For example, the number of devices that someone has access to and is using, the types of models that they have will tell you something about how tech savvy they are or otherwise. The amount of time it takes them to research a product and then go on to take an action will tell you something about how impulsive or diligent that they are. And actually, we've seen, even in the last few months, lots of different examples of this. So for example, podcast campaigns. We had a podcast campaign where, as you'd expect, 80% of the delivery was on mobile phones, but most of the call to action was browser-based. So a single device view looks like the campaign isn't particularly effective. Only 0.03% of people who heard it went onto the advertiser's website. But when you look at it through a cross-device view, you see that's actually 0.6%, an enormous increase. I'll give you another example. We had a travel client, clearly not a category that's particularly active at the moment, but one that is bound to come back in the future. And the creative of this campaign was all based around people being on the go. It was tied to weather and location. So naturally, it was high smartphone delivery. But most people still research and book holidays on desktops. And actually, the response rate we saw, the number of people listening who went onto the advertiser's website was 10x what we thought it was on a single device view once we applied the cross-device view. And lastly, We've seen across the whole range of grocery campaigns, which actually have a much better mix in terms of delivery of ads across different devices, that just being able to tie this cross-device view together gives a much more accurate picture of how people are listening and how they're behaving. So in summary, this picture, this idea that people are using multiple devices at multiple moments through the day, listening to lots of different types of content, that used to be a problem in some ways. Very interesting from a kind of an intellectual and a consumer behavior perspective, but a problem when it came to measurement. But now it's a strength. The complexity and the richness of audio consumption can be measured, which means it can be leveraged by brands to deliver better results. Thank you very much for your time. That's the presentation. As I said, a little bit strange doing that, not being able to see anyone in the audience, or have you not seen me. But I think what I'll leave you with is that I've given examples which are relevant to kind of now quite a lot, and the situation we find ourselves in, which is also which is obviously really difficult. But the world is going to go back to normal, and these kind of products, this kind of level of insight and understanding, has far broader ramifications and implications than just today. So we're really excited about it. We think that the entire audio industry is going in the right direction in its ability to prove effectiveness to advertisers and to offer them real actionable insight. And so in summary, all of this used to be a problem. The fact that audio journeys can be so complex used to be an issue, because while it's really interesting from a consumer behavior standpoint, it threw up issues in terms of measurement, all those different devices, all those different locations, times of day, and types of content. But now actually it becomes a strength. The complexity and richness of audio consumption can be measured, which means it can be leveraged by brands to deliver them better results. And we're really excited about this. Now in the situation we're in, but also into the future, we think that audio measurement is becoming better and better. The whole audio industry is becoming better at helping advertisers understand the effectiveness of the medium, but also in delivering them actionable insight that helps them improve the efficacy of their campaigns. So thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you have enjoyed the content thus far, and that you enjoy the content for the rest of the day. Thank you very much to MediaTel for putting this on, and I hope that the slightly strange circumstances haven't made it any less enjoyable or informative. So thank you very much.